Welcome, listener, to Right Here, Right Queer. This is Sebastian Nothwell here today with Alison McKenzie. Hello, Alison.
Hello, thank you for having me.
No worries. Alison is an author of medieval historical romance, including The Blacksmith's Bride and the upcoming sapphic romance, The Tailor's Treasure. So, Alison, what can you tell us about The Tailor's Treasure?
So, Taylor's Treasure is, you mentioned, it's a sequel to The Blacksmith's Bride. It follows the sister of one of the protagonists of Blacksmith's Bride. Her name is Isabel. She is a single mom in medieval England living with her horrible in laws. And one day, when she's at the market with her son, she bumps into this tailor's wife, Constance, and they strike up a friendship. Because Isabel is a skilled embroiderer, Constance asks her, like, do you want to help out in the shop? And they do, and things kind of go from there. But because Isabel is kind of tied to her horrible husband's family, there are complications when they start to fall in love with each other.
Yes, I appreciated the level of care and attention to detail you took with portraying her escape from an oppressive home situation.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of my biggest research resources for this book was a book by Barbara Hannawalt about the way families were structured in medieval England. The Ties That Bound, that's the book. And one of the things that really unlocked the premise of the book for me was that in medieval England, if a man passed away and he had children, he got to decide in his will who would raise those children and who would have legal guardianship over them, and it would not automatically go to his wife. So that is kind of the foundational conflict here, which is that Isabel doesn't have legal rights to her son, and if she were to cross her in-laws, she could very easily find herself removed from his life. So she really has to tread carefully when it comes to dealing with them.
It is deeply frustrating and rage inducing just how long we went through history before mothers had any right to their own children.
No, yeah, it's crazy. There's a lot of mythology, both current and historic, around like, oh, well, moms always get the rights of the kids, when no, actually, historically speaking, and to an extent till still now, children are considered the property of their fathers first. And then the mother is also considered kind of the property of the father or the spouse. And so it goes down the line that way. So there's no assumption of autonomy for either the mother or the kids. A lot of the time I find when I'm writing, I will figure out sort of halfway through what the book is about just based on the plots and the themes that keep recurring. And in this one, it was really how women navigate marriage, and especially how they did it in this time, how each of them responded to the idea of marriage and family, what they wanted from their adult lives, what was expected of them, and how well they conformed to that. So I think I've got Isabel, obviously, I've got Constance, I've got Marjorie, and I've got Leia. So yeah, I've got four women in this book who are all either about to get married, are fighting against being about to get married, or are widowed, or are married in ways that are not quote unquote traditional. And they're all just kind of figuring out what that means for them.
Without spoiling too much, I did really enjoy Marjorie's subplot and how it kind of provided a window into some of the ways women could enjoy some level of independence in this era, including the pilgrimage, which in much the same way as the like aristocratic men's grand tour of the 18th and 19th centuries, a pilgrimage kind of gave a medieval individual an excuse to like travel, if not the world, at least throughout their own nation and like see something beyond the village they were born in.
Sorry, there's a very famous English woman named Marjorie Kemp who went on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, and I just realized I named my would-be pilgrim character Marjorie, and I
I
didn't
thought
do it on purpose, and it literally just clicked for me. I was like, wait a second.
I thought that was a
No, no, it wasn't.
what a magnificent and beautiful coincidence.
Oh, I love it when that happens. But yeah, so all the ways that women could kind of navigate the expectations for them in the medieval world were of interest to me because when you're writing specifically a sapphic romance, obviously they're already pushing against the expectations for what their lives are going to look like. And so I wanted to kind of explore the different paths women might take to get to that point.
And how it's not always necessarily taking up a sword.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, sometimes it can be, but in the case of this book, it's also kind of so there's this really great book by oh, of course I'm going to blank on the name again. It's called Strangers Homosexual Love in the 19th Century. The author is Graham somebody. It's going to come to me like 5 minutes later.
Graham Robb.
Graham Robb, yes, yes. And he makes a really salient point in the introduction about how our conception of queer history is very shaped by the records that get left behind. And because queer relationships were not legally recognized for most of history, the records we have tend to be prison records. So it tends to be when somebody got caught or when somebody was prosecuted, that's when we hear about them. And what that's done is it's given us a very skewed idea of what queer life looked like prior to the 20th century. Because if the only records we have are the prison records, we kind of work backwards and think, oh, well, all queer people ended up in prison. When in fact, the ones who didn't, probably the majority, are simply the ones who were under the radar, were not legally recognized, but still lived together. There is a gravestone in, I want to say Oxford, I could be remembering wrong, of two women, Agnes Oxenbridge and Elizabeth Etchingham. And they were buried together, and nobody knows the details of their relationship, like why they were buried together, what they were to each other, but we know that they were buried in the same grave, which is an anomaly for this period. And so it's little crumbs like that that you kind of pick up and go, what could have been happening here? We don't know for sure and we never can. And it's very possible that the people involved wouldn't have even wanted us to, that they would have preferred to live and die in anonymity. But if you look, you can find like little kind of breadcrumb trails of what might have been.
You make a very salient point on your blog that, like, the historical queer person most people are familiar with is Oscar Wilde, and it's because he went to jail.
And listen, I love Oscar Wilde, but he was, how do I put this? He's a bit of a messy bitch. Made a lot of choices. Most of them were not good.
But also, like, Oscar Wilde married a woman and had 2 children with her. And if he had not gone to prison, you would have people arguing to this day that he was straight because of that.
100%. 100%. There's still like back and forth about like, was he bi? Was he gay? I think that's kind of entirely beside the point.
Yeah.
But he was as out as you could be in that period without just like walking down Main Street holding a sign over your head saying, hello, I like men. But that was kind of the thing in that period. And I think in a lot of historical periods where there was a lot of plausible deniability. Again, if you were not literally caught in the act, for most of history, actually, at least most of English history, if you were not specifically caught in the act of committing sorry, this is another tangent. Sodomy doesn't mean anal sex specifically. Sodomy means any sex that is not procreative. And in the medieval period, all of it was kind of under the same umbrella of don't do that. So if someone was arrested for sodomy, that didn't necessarily mean they were arrested for a man having sex with another man. There's a number of things they could have been doing. But also in general, if you were not specifically found in the act with your pants down, you could skate pretty clearly. And I do make the point in the book that for lesbians, it was in some ways easier because, again, non procreative sex was considered sinful and it would be punished by the church if people got caught at it. But it wasn't a crime in the legal sense. Like the civil courts were not concerned with it. And so, unless a woman got caught with another woman using a dildo specifically, that was what put it over the edge to actual criminality. Apart from that, it's just considered like, masturbation, lewdness, etc. And you'd still be punished for it, but it was like say 5 Hail Marys and make a donation to the church. It wasn't a get put in the pillory type of crime. When I was first doing research for this book and when I was like talking to other historical romance authors of like what kind of conflict could women in this situation be running into, people would say like, oh, well, they'd get sent to an insane asylum or they'd get put in prison. And it is it No, not in this period, for starters. I
No.
think it's people kind of have a sort of mushy idea of history where it's like, well, I know at some point in the past you could get sent to an asylum if you were a lesbian, so I just assume that at any point before 1960 that was the case.
Yeah, first you have to build the asylums and then.
Well, they did have asylums. They did have Bethlehem Hospital in London, which was a place where the mentally ill, where we would consider the mentally ill, were cared for. It was run by the church, but the asylum as punishment was really not a thing in this period. Like community care for the mentally ill in general was not a huge thing in this period. It was generally handled by the church, but the church was not taking people on if they didn't have to.
My area of familiarity is the Victorian and a little bit into the early 19th century, and I think there are some ideas that people ascribe to the medieval era that are extraordinarily modern.
Yeah, we're also obviously building on historians of the past, and the Victorians had a bit of a loosey-goosey approach to historical accuracy in their scholarship.
A little.
Little bit.
A lot of people, I think, don't realize that, like, homosexuality was a mental health diagnosis until the late 20th century. And being institutionalized for being a lesbian was a very post-invention of psychology phenomenon.
Yeah, and even that, like for most of history, homosexuality was not considered an innate identity because no sexuality was considered an innate identity. It was something you did, and it was like a sexual thing you weren't supposed to do, but it was a sexual thing you weren't supposed to do in the same way that like you weren't supposed to do blowjobs, heterosexual blowjobs. Again, any kind of sex that wasn't procreative was generally frowned upon. Like people did it all over the place, but it was technically you weren't supposed to. But sexual behavior was considered a choice that anyone could make. So, like, there was no, this person is a congenital sodomite. It was this person decided to go out and have sex with another man. And that is something that any person could do. And they're gross for making the choice, but it's not something about them that created it. It's just something that anyone could do. Like the idea of born this way is an invention of the late Victorians, of scholars like Magnus Hirschfeld. Prior to that, it was much, much more fluid in terms of the way people thought of it. We actually do have a journal written in the 1700s by an English farmer.
I was just about to say I couldn't remember his name.
Oh, I can't remember his name either, but it's very, very interesting because he's just writing about his day to day and the conversations what he has with his friends down at the pub. But he mentions that, you know, a couple of men locally have just been condemned for sodomy, and he's kind of hashing out an argument in his journal. It's like, well, if God made them that way, then it's not really fair of us to be punishing them for it because God did that for a reason. And you can kind of see that identity model of sexuality emerging at that point, but it wouldn't become codified until the late 1800s. And that obviously is like several hundred years after where these books take place.
So in these books, we're only dealing with the extremely broad definition of sodomy,
Very, very broad.
which does not necessarily apply to our sapphic protagonists.
No, again, if they ever get the dildo out, then they might be in trouble, but with what they are doing in this book, it's just general sinfulness, but not of a specific type. And also, it was a lot kind of easier to. It was and it wasn't. Like, again, because people had to be caught in the act in order to get in trouble, it gave a lot more leeway. But these characters are also privileged in that they have a house
Yes.
that they can go to, that they're not sharing with multiple generations. And again, without spoiling too much, they don't have to worry about anyone in the house ratting them out. So they have privacy on a level that a lot of people in this period did not have access to just because sleeping areas were generally common areas. So you didn't have your own space. Honestly, even like Isabel, when we meet her in this book, is sleeping in a room with her two nieces and also her son. And like she has a curtain, but that's about it. And that's generally the level of privacy you could expect in this era. Because Constance has her own home established, she has a lot more control over her environment, which is how, again, not spoiling too much, but how she has been able to have a sex life as a lesbian that would really not have been accessible to Isabel prior to this.
Isabel really does kind of go on a self-discovery journey as a result of the privacy afforded by Constance's living situation.
She does, and I wanted to kind of explore what that kind of self-discovery would look like for her, because as I said, lesbian was not an identity in this period. So she is not like finding herself attracted to another woman and thinking, oh my God, what does this change about me? What does this mean for who I am as a person? The journey she's on is much more, am I capable of feeling pleasure? Am I capable of feeling love for someone? Am I capable of being loved? Which I found a lot more interesting. Like, obviously, a lot of queer romances have the kind of the coming out plot and the self-identity struggle, and that's obviously valid. But I found it much more interesting to be like, the fact that it's another woman is almost beside the point. It's the fact that Isabel has never before been in a relationship where she feels valued that is kind of rocking her world in this whole thing. And Constance, too, to an extent, but Constance also has the backing of a supportive family that Isabel doesn't really. And so they're coming at it from different angles.
It was extraordinarily heartwarming just to watch Isabel realize she could be loved and realize that there was a future beyond just day-to-day survival. That kind of opening up of her world.
Yeah, it's like one of the questions you asked me in your email was, what are some themes you love to explore and revisit in your writing? And I think this is something that comes up for me time and time again when I'm writing, which is characters realizing that they have the power to steer their own destinies apart from just the day-to-day survival. Because I am drawn generally to working class characters in historicals just because maybe it's a political thing, but it's also just kind of, I find man versus society stories really compelling. And so when I write these characters, usually they're coming from a place of, I have been surviving, I want to actually live. Can I do that? How can I do that? What is in the way of me doing that? And what can I do to kind of take my life in my hands?
It's a very bread and roses approach to storytelling that I appreciate.
It really is, yes. Yes, and that was a thing in Blacksmith's Bride as well, where it was like our lives are very much controlled by the aristocracy because we are serfs. So how can we manage our lives in a way that is what we want, while also dealing with this system that does not allow for individuality or for personal happiness? And then in this case, it's also that, but it's more internal. It's Isabel coming to realize that actually, yes, she can. She doesn't need to assume that life is going to be horrible forever. She does have the power to change her situation. Not in a bootstraps kind of way, but in a everything has been terrible, but it doesn't mean everything always will be kind of way.
The possibility of a rainbow at the end of the storm, if you will.
Exactly, yeah. She has lived so long in survival mode, she has forgotten or dismissed for her own survival the idea that she can have something beyond just constantly striving for basic security, and that she can rely on other people to help provide that. Isabel's a very, very self-contained character. Like, this book, the first book took me like 6 months to write. This one took me about 3 years.
Oh, geez.
Because Isabel did not want to be known. She was like kicking and screaming at every single point of like, nope, I'm not going to let you in on anything I'm thinking or feeling. I refuse. Which is like a really fun trait as a character and a massive pain in the ass as a writer if you're trying to get in the character's head.
Yes.
Yeah, so I kind of went on the same journey Constance went on in this book, where it's like, okay, you need to actually open up and talk to me, because otherwise we're not going anywhere. Like, it was very rewarding, but please God, let the next characters be more of an open book.
She's a very soft sort of hedgehog, she is.
She really is. And I love that because I love female characters who are kind of assholes.
Yes.
Like, she's not an asshole per se, but she is prickly and she is standoffish and she tends to respond to offers of help with suspicion. And I really love that about her because I love a character who has to have their walls broken down. And I feel like that doesn't happen with female characters as much as male characters. So I kind of loved writing against type with her, where she's like, I'm not just gonna immediately trust someone. You have to convince me that you're trustworthy.
Unfortunately, that does include the author writing her.
Yeah, it really does.
So you are obviously extremely well versed in history and class history and queer history in particular. What drew you to writing historical fiction in general and medieval romance specifically?
So I've always been a history nerd, like from childhood on. I devoured like Royal Diaries and Dear Canada. For listeners who aren't familiar, Dear Canada is the Canadian version of Dear America. They're like fictional diaries of girls living through historical events. So that was always something that interested me and always something that informed the stories I wrote. And then for romance, I actually did not think of myself potentially as a romance author for a really long time. I read historical romance, but I was like, oh, well, that's not something I can do. Because I'm not going to say mostly, but for a long time, all I wrote was fantasy and horror. And then in 2021, we were still in lockdown. I had just graduated from library school, and obviously the job market was not lively. So I was at home with nothing to do, and so I signed up for a program called Get Your Words Out, where basically you pledge to write a certain number of words in a year.
Oh.
And I was like, okay, what can I write that's just like low stress, no pressure, no assumption of making this ready for publication? And I went back to characters that I had played in a role-playing game on LiveJournal like 10 years earlier.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it was based on there was this show on the BBC, Robin Hood, in the late,
Yes.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So Elizabeth was my character. She was like obviously an original character, and then Matthew was an NPC who I came up with to interact with her. And then they'd always kind of been at the back of my mind of like, I wonder what those guys are up to. And then when I signed up for this writing program, I was like, I can write their story. And it's not like, it's just going to be for fun. It's not going to be a thing. It's just, me playing around. And then I wrote it and I was like, actually, I think I can publish this. And then the rest is kind of history because Isabel, as I said, is Matthew's sister in that book. And once I'd written it, I was like, well, I have to write her book now because I left her in not a great spot at the end of that one. And she clearly needs a story of her own. And then it just spiraled from there.
I do love when the practice book becomes a real book because I had a similar journey with Mr. Warren's Profession.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, the thing is, and this might be getting too inside baseball, we can cut this later if you don't want to, but the reason I know you in the first place is from Ripper Street fandom.
Yes!
Yep. So I was like, oh, he's writing historical romance now. Yeah, that tracks.
There's more than a little Ripper Street in Mr. Warren's Profession, I do have to admit.
Yeah. Finally, Fred Best gets a happy ending.
God, that poor man.
Oh, God. I think, didn't David Dawson also play a gay character in like some period drama about Vikings or like very early medieval England?
Here's the thing. So he wasn't queer in the show because the show is very, how do I put this, dad fiction?
Mm-hmm. It's based on a Bernard Cornwell book, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, dad
so
fiction.
It's very, if you're familiar with like Sharp's rifles or...
Oh, yeah.
I'm so sorry, this is such a tangent, but the premise of The Last Kingdom is very early medieval kingdom of Wessex standing up against Viking invasions as told through the point of view of original character Viking man who is torn between loyalties of Wessex and Vikings, and the reason history has never heard of him is that he and Alfred the Great were besties and they made a secret deal that Alfred would leave him out of his chronicle.
Oh, naturally.
Naturally. He's the most important person in the whole story, but no one can know.
Well, dads also must have their OCs.
Yes, and I do appreciate them.
They're Vaniels, if you will.
Yes. But David Dawson did go on to both come out himself and play a queer historical character in the Harry Styles vehicle, My Policeman.
Oh, God, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Oh, because, yeah, that was, like, what, 2022?
Just about, yeah.
The same time Don't Worry, Darling came out, and it was, like, the summer of bad Harry Styles movies.
It was the summer of Harry Styles movies, and I can't call it bad, because David Dawson is acting his heart out as ever. It's just that...
And then Harry Styles is also there.
Harry Styles is also there.
And then everyone said, okay, that's enough of that.
Apologies to all the One Directioners listening.
Yeah, sorry, I respect your beliefs, even if I do not believe in your beliefs. I'm sure he's very nice.
I do not believe in your beliefs, but you have the right to them.
Yeah. God, yeah, the One Direction has a startling connection to queer fiction, all things considered.
Truly.
I do have, like, a working theory that boy bands are intended to be, like, heterosexual training wheels for tween girls, except it keeps going sideways because they keep writing RPF about them instead.
Yep. But back to what we were wrangling this back onto topic. As alluded to earlier, what are some themes that you love to explore or revisit in your writing?
Again, I do love historical fiction about working class characters, and again, this probably is political personal to some extent. Like, I have a lot of union members in my family. My great-grandfather actually was like a union leader in Edinburgh in the 20s and 30s. They offered him like a Order of the British Empire, and he refused it. So that's the family background I come from. But I also find it interesting in general to write stories about people dealing with systems that are not set up for them to win. There's been a lot of hand-wringing in historical romance recently about, like, is the genre dying? Why are all these imprints shutting down? Why aren't people reading it anymore? And I think the truth is that a lot of people are tired of the Dukes and Duchesses. But because historical romance publishing in mainstream is so risk averse, they're like, well, we're just going to keep publishing the same thing and hoping that at some point it'll pick back up instead of expanding into different types of characters and different types of identities. And that's why I think the indie historical romance space has really boomed, because it allows authors like you and I to kind of explore topics that traditional publishing wouldn't touch, like working class characters. And so the traditional, quote unquote, traditional historical romance plot of, like, Duke meets Duchess and they're in arranged marriages to other people, but oh no, they're in love now, and what shall we do with the society ladies are all gossiping about us. There's a place for it, obviously, people enjoy it, but it lets us do something outside of that framework. And I like to play with ideas that haven't been played with before.
I do love adapting to life outside of the framework, because, yeah, with working class characters and also with queer characters, I
was gonna say, it's almost like we're writing queer romance.
Yeah, and, like, I think some people forget just how recently traditional publishing said, okay, queers can come too.
Mm-hmm.
Because part of the reason, well, the entirety of the reason I self-published instead of going with a publisher was because at the time I was writing and wanted to publish, they were not taking queer romance. A lot of writers that I knew personally were submitting and saying, we love this story, but we can't publish it unless you make one of the dudes a lady.
So, actually, fun story. With Blacksmith's Bride, I did try to go the traditional publishing route at first. And I got several responses saying, I really like the book, I really like the characters. We can't publish this unless it's about lords and ladies. So, could you take the minor antagonist and give him an evil brother to be the antagonist, and then make the other guy the main hero, and then your main couple can be the B-plot?
Write a completely different book.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so you're asking me to write a different book? Because that's from scratch, pretty much. Yeah, and, like, just basically a lot of, we need to have lords and ladies or no dice. And so that's why indie publishing is so great, because we get to explore that. And I know a lot of historical romance authors either just started out self-publishing or went into self-publishing because they were running up against publishers saying, you can't do that, you can't do that, you can't do that. And then finally they said, okay, well, I'm just going to go off and do it myself then.
Yep. What stories inspire you?
So there's this really, really great book. It's called Down the Common, A Year in the Life of a Medieval Woman, and it's by an author named Anne Bayer, who I believe was in, like, her 80s when she published it.
Oh, wow.
And I want to say it was self-published. It was 1996. Okay, so M. Evans and Company Incorporated. I feel like that was probably a self-publishing joint or a very, very micro-publisher. But it's exactly what it says on the tin. It is a year in the life of this woman living in a medieval village, just like her day-to-day, what it's like for her raising her kids, doing her chores, the kind of issues she bumps up against. Like, for instance, one of her children was disabled after an accident where, like, boiling water spilled on him, so she has to worry about his future. She's had a number of children who died either in childbirth or in infancy, and so she's constantly worrying, like, am I pregnant again? I don't want to go through this again. She's married to a man who she's like, they get along okay, but they're not in love. They have to get the harvest in. They have to worry about what will happen if the Lord of the Manor dies without an heir, who will take over for him. It's just a very, very sedate is not the right word, but it's very everyday. It's very like the quiet history that we don't think a lot about because there's nothing dramatic happening. And that has been a major, major inspiration for my books. But just like in terms of historical romances that I've really read and enjoyed. My first historical romance was, I believe, Rose Lerner's In for a Penny. They are aristocracy in that, or one of them is aristocracy. She is, I believe, like a shipping magnate's daughter, and they get married, marriage of convenience. And the book is basically them learning to be with each other, like learning what a relationship looks like, how to manage it, how to support each other. And I find that really interesting because, like, obviously the Sturm und Drang, the high drama of, oh no, now we've been kidnapped and we have to run away to Gretna Green, etc., etc., etc. Like, it's fun. I would honestly really love to write a book like that about lesbians because I feel like that doesn't happen very often. But I also, again, just really love the quiet and the slow build of people learning how to live their lives, of learning how to be happy.
Figuring out how to get along with each other in a world that is frankly stacked against them.
Yes, and I do also want to shout out, this is actually a traditionally published author, Jess Everly, whose books I really enjoy, called The Luckiest Lovers in London. They are all queer romances. They're set in like the late 1800s. The reason I enjoy them so much is because she is very much like both in conversation with and expanding beyond the tropes of historical romance. So, like, for instance, in her second book, which I think is probably my favorite of hers, it's called A Rule Book for Restless Rogues. And it's about two best friends who are, like, they fall in love. And one of them is, like, a very camp gay man who runs an underground queer club. And the other one, his family is, like, Unitarian ministers. And part of the conflict is that, like, there's a passage where he's like, well, of course your family thinks it's very wrong that I be persecuted for my sexuality. And of course they think we should be allowed to love who they love, but they're also not really comfortable with, like, the kind of queer I am. That's a really interesting, nuanced conversation that you don't tend to see a lot. You tend to see either like the super supportive family or you see the super homophobic family. You don't see the kind of muddy in between. And Everly plays with that a lot in a way that I find absolutely fascinating.
The muddy in between that so many of us are living in.
Yeah, exactly. Where it's not like everyone's a hero or a villain, and it's not like everyone, because it does also bug me when I read queer historical romance specifically, and it's like, well, all the good people know all the right things to say and have exactly the right attitudes because they were just born innately knowing what the right thing was, instead of, well, that's not necessarily true because we are all products of the society we live in. And even if someone has the best of intentions, that doesn't mean they're always going to get it right. One of the things I went back and forth with on Taylor's Treasure was Isabel's relationship with her younger brother Matthew, which is also a big driver of how she is as a person, what shaped her. And I was like, do I want to make it clear that Matthew understands what's going on with her and Constance? Because obviously Matthew, like, I love him. He was the hero of the previous book. He very fiercely loves his sister and wants to see her happy. But is he going to have the vocabulary to say, well, I think love is love, and I'm so happy that you're happy, and I just want to see you guys get married? No, that's not part of his worldview. It's not an idea he's ever been exposed to. And so what we get with Matthew in the book is he wants her to be happy. And he's like, well, you and this woman seem to be friends, so you should go live with her and be happy because I want that for you. He doesn't have the vocabulary to be like, you guys are in love. But he's like, well, from what I'm seeing, this relationship, whatever it is, makes you happy. So I want you to pursue it.
I think there was also, throughout history, friendship held more weight because most people weren't aware of queer relationships.
Oh, 100%.
So there was less fear about being so openly attached to friends.
Yeah, like casual affection was much more common. Like men in the medieval period kissed each other on the mouth all the time. It wasn't a big deal.
And also, like, as you alluded to earlier, sharing a bed platonically was not a big deal because it's cold out there.
Yeah, there's a limited number of beds.
And even, like, sharing a bed platonically with total strangers if you're traveling
Yep.
on a pilgrimage, for example, like...
Everyone's just crammed on in there together.
Yeah. So overall, what would you say drives your storytelling and motivates you to write?
Spite. Not exclusively, but
It is a recurring theme on this podcast, I will say, with myself and many of the authors we've interviewed. It's like, no, fuck you, I'm gonna write.
yeah, exactly. Someone says to me, well, you can't write that. I'm like, oh yeah? Watch me. But I do also, like, one of the best comments I've ever gotten on a piece of writing, it was actually fan fiction. It wasn't original fiction, but it was someone, and it was like a series about a character kind of coming into his own after trauma and discovering his own ability to be happy, which again is a theme that runs through my writing. And someone commented, the exact words I think were, I love how your writing feels like a hug, but it's not a constricting hug. It feels like you're not alone. And I was like,
Oh.
I gotta shut this down now. I'm not getting any better than this. So yeah, I'm wary of representation as a selling point because I don't want to ever be like, well, you should read my book because lesbians. Well, you should read my book because it talks about, sexual dysfunction, or it talks about child abuse, or it talks about neurodivergence or whatever. I don't want that to be like this cynical marketing ploy, but I do want people to be able to read my books and think, oh, this person feels the way I feel, and they're expressing it in a way that I haven't been able to, and that makes me feel less alone.
Yeah, that's beautiful. In a similar vein, what do you hope to accomplish with your stories?
I want to tell stories. Ultimately, I want people to be touched by them. I want people to come away feeling like I've had an emotional reaction to this. I obviously can't control what that emotional reaction is. It might be pure rage, but I want to write something that makes people feel feelings. Like, the worst thing to me would be writing a book where someone just finishes it and is like, okay, I'm never going to think about that again, and I feel nothing.
Yeah.
I want them to feel something.
The indifference really hits the worst.
Yeah.
And what is the number one thing you want readers to take away from your books, if you had to choose just the one?
History is so much bigger than we think. It's so much bigger than you've been told, and it's so much bigger than just the very narrow set of stories that we get exposed to. If you think that the life you're living is unprecedented in history, I promise you it's not. I promise you that so many other people have thought and felt the way you're feeling now, and they have survived it, and so will you.
My own interest in history did stem from a desperate desire to find anyone else who felt like this. And so to have more books out there that carry that message onward is truly beautiful.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for aspiring authors?
Write what you want to write. Don't try to write what you think will be publishable. Because the thing is, even if you are writing exactly to trend, like if you're writing a romantasy and there's, a shadow daddy and they're all fairies and there's et cetera, one, if your heart's not in it, it's not going to be good. People can tell. And two, by the time you're done, the market's going to have moved on anyway, so you just wasted your time. You have your own story. You don't need to tell someone else's story. And your own story might not be considered quote unquote marketable. It might not be considered like right for market, but there is someone out there who needs to hear it. So try to remember that if a publisher says to you, well, I can't publish this because it's not mainstream enough, it's not what we're looking for, that's not a comment on the quality of the story. That's a comment on the market, and you are not the market. You are a storyteller. You are not a business. You should not be writing based on what you think other people want. You should be writing based on what you want, because that is the only way you are going to tell a story worth telling.
Co-signed.
Thank you.
So, Alison, where can people find you, your works, your writing, and keep up with all your books?
So I technically have a website, which is really just kind of a keeping the lights on type of thing, because I was told I had to. It's AlisonMcKenzieWrites.wordpress.com. I have an Instagram, A McKenzie Writes. I have a Blue Sky, A McKenzie Writes. But probably the best place to find me is on Instagram, because that is where I post the most.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a delightful conversation.
Thank you for having me.
And we'll be back next week with more Right Here, Right Queer.
All right, goodbye, everybody.